The Last of Us is a special game. There's nothing that we or anyone else can say about it that hasn't already been said before. A thrilling journey wrought with emotion and adrenaline. An engaging story of two deeply flawed yet incredibly sympathetic characters. A visual and technical masterpiece that showcases Naughty Dog's writing at its best. These are all things that we've heard before, and you know what? They're all true. The Last of Us is one of those rare games that you praise for its standout storytelling and you actually mean it. In this feature, we're going to take a look back at the complete story of The Last of Us, including the events portrayed in the Left Behind DLC, from start to finish, and in as much detail as possible. Considering the nature and style of the narrative of The Last of Us, our focus is going to be first and foremost on the characters, just as it is in the game itself. So while in previous Story So Far features, we've spent a lot of time exploring the lore of franchises such as Mass Effect and Metal Gear Solid, our focus this time is going to be almost completely on the personal journeys of Joel and Ellie. So without further ado, let's begin. The Last of Us story is centered primarily around a core cast of two characters, telling the story of a single year in their lives. But the events that kick off the story themselves take place 20 years before that. It all begins on October 26th of the year 2013, a day that goes on to be known as Outbreak Day. It also happens to be Joel's birthday, one of the two main protagonists of the game, and a single father to a young daughter named Sarah. A terrifying disease known as the cordyceps brain infection tears through America and critically hits the masses on this day, causing chaos and destruction in most major cities. What exactly is this disease though? It's described as a fungal infection that attacks the brain and slowly takes over the victim's or host's entire body, turning them into crazed, rabid, mindless, zombie-like freaks. And as the infected start tearing society apart on Outbreak Day, Joel tries to get Sarah to safety. He's helped by his brother Tommy, the three of them trying to make it out of Austin as all hell breaks loose around them. After several close calls and being witness to some terrifying things, Joel and Sarah get separated from Tommy. In the confusion, Sarah gets hurt, but Joel picks her up and pushes on, even as they're being chased by the infected. Soon, however, they encounter a soldier. Joel asks him for help, but soon realizes that that's not going to happen. The soldier's commanded by his superiors to take out Joel and Sarah, fearing that they too might be infected. The soldier opens fire, and Joel throws himself and Sarah to the ground as he tries to get out of the way. Tommy arrives at the scene at just the right moment, shooting and killing the soldier. The worst, however, has already happened. Tommy notices that Sarah's been shot, having taken a bullet in the stomach from the soldier, and she's bleeding out. Joel takes her in his arms, and seeing the life slip out of her, he breaks down. Within seconds, in the final moments of the game's harrowing and memorable prologue, Joel's daughter dies in his arms. And that is when The Last of Us story really begins. It's now 20 years later, and the cordyceps brain infection has wrecked human society and civilization as we know it. The towering cityscapes that used to bustle with life and activity are now urban jungles overgrown with wild and newly grown forests, inhabited by all sorts of animals, reclaimed by nature in essence. Most of the population has either died or has fallen victim to the cordyceps brain infection, and they now roam the remnants of the old world as mindless, twisted, and terrifying zombies. Of these infected, there's a few different kinds. There's the more common and also more generic-looking runners. These are humans that are in the relatively early stages of the infection, when the brain and body are still trying and failing to fight the rapid growth of the disease. Runners look more or less like your regular run-of-the-mill zombies, but they're extremely aggressive and surprisingly fast. The real threat, though, at least as far as the infected go, is the clickers. The clickers are what happens once the cordyceps infection fully takes over its host. The fungus grows over all of the brain, and then starts growing outward, through the host's eyes and mouth and nose, eventually covering the victim in grotesque spore-like outgrowths. Clickers are also blind, though, so they see through echolocation, which is where they get the name. They make unsettling and weirdly unnerving clicking sounds to see through sound, and pinpoint the locations of their victims. Once they hear something, they are frighteningly ferocious, incredibly agile, and a single one of their bites is enough to kill someone. As you can imagine, all of this is important for the story, but what of the people who have somehow managed to survive so far? Well, society as we know it has broken down completely, but a shallow remnant of it still remains. Several small pockets of humans occupy walled-off, heavily defended areas known as quarantine zones, or QZs, all of which are under martial law. There's no government, and while people living within quarantine zones are safe from the outside world and the terrors that now occupy it, they live under oppression and in very dire circumstances, living in fear of both getting infected and military oppression. even the slightest exposure to the cordyceps fungus can infect a person, at which point the military wastes no time in putting them down. Sure, people often wear gas masks to keep that from happening, but even breathing in a single spore of the fungus can be deadly. Most choose to accept military oppression as the best option available in a terrible situation, choosing to subject themselves to unorganized military rule rather than taking their chances outside the QZs, where raving and roving bands of thugs and bandits would be the least of their worries. Some, however, have chosen to fight against it. The Fireflies are a resistance group of fighters that want an actual government to be reinstated. They're fighting against military control, and for this they've been branded as outlaws. They operate mostly as a guerrilla group and strike from the shadows, disrupting activities in QZs whenever and wherever they can. Among these is the quarantine zone in Boston, Massachusetts, which is where we find an older and more grizzled Joel as the Last of Us story really begins, 20 years after the death of Sarah. And these 20 years have not been kind to Joel, or anyone else for that matter. Since the death of his daughter, Joel has turned into a hardened and embittered man. He has very little moral boundary left to cross, and puts survival above everything else. As it turns out, he isn't even with his brother Tommy anymore. Where exactly he is and what happened between the two of them is a question we'll look into later on. In the Boston quarantine zone, he operates as a smuggler who frequently sneaks out of the zone illegally to trade with other survivors in everything from food to weapons. He doesn't, however, work alone, with Tess being both a professional partner and a friend to him. At the beginning of the game, Tess arrives where Joel lives and tells him that while she was on her way back from completing a deal, she was jumped by two thugs, men who would have killed her if she hadn't killed them first. And it turns out that these thugs were sent by a man named Robert, who operates as the local illegal arms dealer in the Boston QZ. Robert, as it turns out, is in possession of weapons that he'd stolen from Joel and Tess. As such, he knows that they're going to come after him, which is why he wants to take them out first. Tess tells Joel that she knows where Robert is hiding, and the two of them decide to track him down and kill him before he can get to them. But as they're walking through the QZ, they witness an abrupt attack by a group of Fireflies. As combat breaks out between the military and the Fireflies, Joel and Tess manage to get off the street and sneak their way out of the QZ. A significant portion of the game that follows is focused on Joel and Tess making their way past scores of Robert's men. There's stealth and on-the-go crafting, messy yet thrilling gunfights, and brutal hand-to-hand executions. Eventually, after having fought or sleuthed past a number of hurdles, they manage to find Robert. The arms dealer tries to run for it, but Joel and Tess manage to catch him, and Tess all but breaks his legs to stop him from running again. Injured and defenseless, Robert has no option but to answer Joel and Tess's questions. He tells them that he doesn't have their weapons anymore, that he owed them to the Fireflies and thus had to hand them over. Seeing that they have no use for the arms dealer anymore, Tess shoots Robert in the head. She and Joel then decide to look for the Fireflies, but they don't have to go very far. They encounter Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, a woman both Joel and Tess apparently know very well. Joel, you see, has had run-ins with the Fireflies himself. In the 20 years that followed Outbreak Day, Joel played every role that he had to survive another day, going from bandit to smuggler and everything in between. Joel's brother Tommy, on the other hand, was all about fighting for a cause. He was once a Firefly himself, which is how Joel knows Marlene so well. Of course, Tommy's not a Firefly anymore, and he and Joel haven't seen each other in a while, but that's something we'll talk about in greater detail later on. Marlene now stands before Joel and Tess, with Robert lying dead between them. She tells them that they can have their weapons back, plus some extra weapons from herself. But there's a catch. They have to agree to do a job for her. Smuggle some cargo from inside the QZ to a specific location outside. And what is this cargo exactly? It's a 14-year-old girl named Ellie, the other protagonist of The Last of Us, a fiery and determined young woman. How does she know Marlene though? Why does she need to be smuggled outside? These are all questions that Joel and Tess don't need answers to. To them, this is just another smuggling job, and Ellie is just cargo. Tess goes with Marlene and confirms that she does indeed have the weapons, and so she and Joel agree to do the job. They agree to smuggle Ellie outside the QZ and give her over to a group of Fireflies that'll be waiting for them across the city at the Capitol building, and then collect their payment as soon as they return. And so Joel, Tess, and Ellie set out in the middle of the night, keeping in the shadows and making every attempt to make sure they don't get caught by any of the military's patrols. But as they're about to leave the QZ, that's exactly what happens. The three of them get ambushed by a patrol of two soldiers heavily armed and armored. While one of the soldiers calls for backup on his radio, the other subjects Joel, Tess, and Ellie to a scan for the cordyceps infection. He scans both Joel and Tess with the machine, confirms that they're both clean, and just as he's about to move on Ellie, she panics. Ellie stabs the soldier with a switchblade just as he moves in to scan her. Grabbing this opportunity, Joel and Tess both move quickly as well. They make quick work of the two soldiers, killing them within seconds. In order to make sure that they can escape before the soldiers' backup arrives, they decide to move on. But before they can do so, they notice something strange. While Ellie did indeed stab the soldier scanning her with a switchblade, the scan had already been completed. Tess and Joel look at the reading on the machine, and they're alarmed to see that it says Ellie is carrying the infection. When pressed for answers by Joel and Tess, Ellie tells them what's really going on. She rolls back her sleeve and reveals that she has a bite from one of the infected on her arm, and that she does indeed have the infection. However, she also claims that the bite is 3 weeks old, which is strange because, as Tess points out, people usually turn within 2 days of being exposed to the cordyceps fungus. Ellie, however, is adamant that her injury is 3 weeks old. Before she can go into greater detail, though, the three of them notice a convoy of soldiers in the distance moving in their direction. Deciding that making sure they escape before the backup arrives is more important, they leave the area, and after a section of the game where players try and get past scores of heavily armed soldiers with the help of either stealth, combat, or both, they are able to get away safely. At this point, Ellie explains to Joel and Tess what's going on. She tells them that because of the bite on her arm, Marlene thinks that she's immune to the cordyceps infection, and that whatever is in her blood is the key to a vaccine and in turn humanity's salvation. The Fireflies, she explains, have a bunch of scientists working for them. Scientists who are looking for a cure. And it's these scientists that the group of Fireflies at the Capitol building are supposed to deliver Ellie to. Joel, of course, wants no part of it. He tells Tess that this is not what they signed up for, that they should abandon the job and just go back to the quarantine zone before they run into any trouble. But Tess is able to change his mind. She tells Joel that Ellie is still, for all intents and purposes, just cargo, and that if they're able to deliver her to the Capitol building and make it back, which they should be able to do, then they'll be able to collect the weapons that they're owed. Joel reluctantly agrees, and the three of them set out to make it to their destination across the city. The next couple hours of the game are a beautiful mix of quiet, character-building scenes and intense, heart-pumping, edge-of-the-seat moments. Naughty Dog's writing shines once again as the bond between Joel and Tess is portrayed through simple yet effective dialogue, while Ellie's character is also slowly given more shape. As a young girl who was born years after the outbreak, Ellie has never known a world to be anything other than a hollow shell it is now. And what are memories of a normal life to people like Joel and Tess are just fantasies and stories for her. She's been living in the Boston QZ her entire life, and her awe and wonder at the rugged and overgrown beauty of the outside world are perfect illustrations of what it must be like to be a child of the apocalypse. As the three of them make their way through a dead city crawling with terrors, they come across several runners and clickers and are involved in countless close calls. More than once, they're almost overwhelmed by large numbers of the infected, but somehow they manage to make it through, and after harrowing trials, Joel, Tess, and Ellie finally make it to the Capitol building, but things don't quite turn out the way they're supposed to. It turns out that the group of Fireflies that was waiting for them had already been slaughtered by somebody, which means that completing the job that Marlene hired Joel and Tess to do has just become a great deal more complicated. Tess starts checking the bodies in a panic, looking for any clues they might have left behind for where the other Fireflies might be, or another place that Ellie might be delivered to. But Joel's had about enough at this point. He tells Tess that they've done their part, and he's not going to risk his life and Tess's to finish a job that he has no patience for. But at that moment, Tess drops some terrible news on him. She tells him that while they were making their way across Boston to the Capitol building, in one of their many encounters with the infected, one of them managed to bite her. She shows Joel the wound and begs him to make sure that Ellie gets delivered to the Fireflies. Tess knows she doesn't have long now, and she admits to Joel that both of them are terrible people on account of everything they've done to survive, which is why she feels so strongly about this one last job. She tells Joel that if he feels any sort of obligation to her after years of friendship, which he clearly does, then he needs to do this for her. He needs to make sure that Ellie gets safely delivered to the Fireflies. She asks Joel to find his brother Tommy, all the way over in Jackson County. Since Tommy was once part of the Fireflies himself, Tess figures he'll probably know where to take Ellie. Just as Joel agrees, the three of them hear activity outside the building and realize that they've been surrounded by a military convoy, most likely the same one that hunted down the group of Fireflies. Tess tells Joel to take Ellie and run, informing him that she'll be staying behind to buy them time. And as much as he may not like it, Joel knows that it's the best option right now. The infection has been in Tess for some time now, which means she's about to turn, and she's determined not to let that happen. The military swarms into the Capitol building just as Joel and Ellie make their narrow escape, slipping past dozens of soldiers. As they flee, they hear the sound of gunfire and combat behind them, as Tess makes her last stand. Heavily outnumbered as she is, she's killed quickly by the military. But her sacrifice is enough to make sure that Joel and Ellie are able to escape. Even after they make their narrow escape from Boston's Capitol building, the military continues to pursue Joel and Ellie. But even after an intense sequence in the dark, abandoned subway tunnels of the city, the two of them manage to shake their pursuers, finally making it to relative safety. Ellie tries to talk to Joel about Tess, to give him some words of comfort, but Joel cuts her off. Tess is the last thing he wants to talk about right now, and he tells that to Ellie in very clear words. He tells Ellie that if they're actually going to do this, if Joel is actually going to risk his own life every second of every day just so that he can get Ellie to the Fireflies, then his word is the law. Whatever he says goes. So, how exactly is Joel going to pull this off? As we've learned by this point, Joel's brother Tommy used to run with the Fireflies in the earlier days of the Outbreak, and even though he doesn't fight with them anymore, Joel figures if he can get Ellie to Tommy, he can in turn get her to the Fireflies. But Tommy is a long, long ways away, and getting to him is not going to be easy. Joel tells Ellie that he knows a man named Bill who lives in an overrun town nearby. Bill, he tells her, owes him some favors, and Joel wants to cash in on those favors for a car, which Bill might have access to, so that he and Ellie can get across the continent a bit more easily. Getting to Bill is easier said than done though. The world has turned into an ugly place in the last 20 years, and people have had to become uglier still to have any shot at surviving. But Bill? Well, Bill takes things a little too far. He considers a certain section of the town Joel and Ellie enter to be his own, and he protects it fiercely. He's set deadly, explosive booby traps wherever he can, and he doesn't react well to people entering his territory. And he's a very impatient and paranoid man, a colorful character to say the least. Joel and Ellie make their way through the town, getting past several of Bill's booby traps and mistakenly triggering a few of them. Soon, however, the situation turns dire, as they end up outnumbered and overwhelmed by large numbers of both runners and clickers. Joel and Ellie fight desperately, and just as things start looking hopeless, they are rescued by Bill, as you may have guessed. The three of them manage to escape by the skin of their teeth, scrambling into one of Bill's safe houses. But Bill's not very happy. He clearly doesn't want the hassle of having Joel and Ellie, or anyone else for that matter, around him. And he also doesn't think the favors he owes Joel are worth as much as the car. After a heated discussion between the two of them and Ellie, Joel manages to calm Bill down and convinces him to help them out. Bill, however, tells him that he doesn't have a car, but if Joel and Ellie can help him scrounge up some parts that he needs, he can fix one up for them, at which point he would no longer owe Joel anything. So, the three of them set about looking for requisite parts, and while doing so, they encounter several dangers. They manage to get past countless infected, narrowly escaping several close calls. Not everything goes perfectly, of course, but eventually, with Bill's help, Joel and Ellie manage to get their hands on a car. At this point, Joel tells Bill that they're square, and then promptly drives away with Ellie. Soon enough, however, things go terribly wrong. One of the most common themes that you see in post-apocalyptic stories is the inherent tendency of humans to act like animals, and that's something we see quite a bit in The Last of Us as well. The infected might be dangerous, but there are ragtag groups of bandits and thugs out in the overgrown urban jungles and the reminders of civilization, and they can be just as dangerous, if not more. Joel and Ellie's drive across the country is cut short quite abruptly when a man stumbles onto the road in front of their car, clearly hurt and begging for them to stop and help. But Joel has seen and done a lot of things to become the survivor that he is now, and this little show the supposedly injured man puts on doesn't even come close to fooling him. He knows that it's a trap, and he's not going to stop the car no matter what. Within seconds, though, things escalate rapidly. A bus crashes into Joel and Ellie's car, forcing them to ditch, and the two of them are promptly swarmed by an entire group of bandits who seem to be known as the Hunters. The Hunters are a vicious, ruthless, and extremely hostile group of survivors living in and around Pittsburgh, and they are extremely territorial in nature. They prey on anyone who might wander into their territory. Such people are known as tourists among the Hunters, and loot them for food, clothes, and supplies, among other things. After Joel and Ellie are ambushed, a group of the Hunters closes in on them, outnumbering them heavily. But after a scrappy, ugly fight, the two of them manage to get past or kill the bandits. They're far from safe though. They are, after all, still in Pittsburgh, and they have to stay on their toes while they're still in the Hunters' territory. The next portion of The Last of Us sees Joel and Ellie cutting through the city while trying to stay one step ahead of the Hunters, and these moments also prove to be quite important for the thing that is essentially the heart of the story, the relationship between Joel and Ellie. Little by little, masterfully written dialogue and wonderfully directed cutscenes portray the growing bond between Joel and Ellie in an understated and extremely effective way. And where there was once unfamiliarity and a natural mistrust between the two of them, there is now a growing trust and signs of them becoming a really great team. Eventually, Joel and Ellie come across something they didn't expect to find, least of all here. Friendly faces. A young man named Henry and his little brother, Sam. Sam and Henry, as it turns out, are part of a larger group of survivors, or at least they used to be. After their quarantine zone was abandoned by the military, their group left, and eventually wandered into Pittsburgh, looking for supplies. Unaware of the presence of the hunters, they were quickly ambushed, at which point Henry and Sam got separated from their group. They have been hiding out in the city for a few days now, trying not to get caught by the hunters. But with the help of Joel and Ellie, Henry thinks he knows how to leave Pittsburgh. He tells Joel that he's supposed to meet up with his group outside the city, and that they intend to look for the Fireflies out in the west, which is quite convenient for Joel and Ellie, as you might imagine. Henry tells them that his group is supposed to be waiting for them at the radio tower outside the city, and he knows just how to get there. He tells them that the hunters guard a large gate that blocks the only viable exit from the city, but that when their guard shift changes during the nighttime, the four of them should be able to slip by unnoticed. Seeing as they don't have a lot of other options on their hands, Joel agrees to help, but as always, things don't really go as planned. Joel, Ellie, Henry, and Sam manage to cross the gate that leads to the outside of the city, but they're unable to do so without attracting attention. As they get past the gate, the hunters give chase in an armored vehicle mounted with a machine gun, and as the hunters close in on them, Henry and Sam abandon Joel and Ellie, seeing a short window of opportunity to escape, and taking it. Cornered and defenseless, Joel and Ellie run for it with the hunters' armored Humvee in pursuit until they eventually chase them to the edge of a broken bridge. Ellie tells Joel that they're gonna have to jump for it, off the bridge and into the rushing river below, in spite of the fact that she doesn't know how to swim. Seeing no other option, Joel and Ellie jump. As they hit the water, Joel grabs hold of Ellie, trying to keep her afloat as the strong current carries them away from the city. But within seconds, Joel's head slams into a boulder in the water and he loses consciousness. For once, however, the worst doesn't happen. Joel is woken up by Ellie a short while later, and when he comes to, he sees that they're on a beach, with the broken bridge that they jumped off in Pittsburgh still visible some distance away. As it turns out, they're not alone. Sam and Henry are there with them, but Joel is in no mood to trust them again. Angered by the fact that Henry abandoned him and Ellie at the first chance he got, Joel pulls a gun on Henry. Ellie, however, tells him that it was the two brothers who pulled him out of the river, and that if it weren't for Henry, they probably would have drowned. Henry tells Joel that the only things he was thinking of was his brother's life, and keeping Sam safe was the most important thing to him. He tells Joel that if he would have been in his position, he would have run as well. And he's right, of course. Joel lowers his gun, seeing the logic in Henry's argument, and the four of them decide to continue their trek to the radio tower. While looking for a way off the beach, they find an entrance that leads into a network of sewers and underground tunnels. The four of them enter the sewers together, not knowing the tribulations that await. The sewers, as you may have guessed, are crawling with the infected. To begin with, Joel and the others are able to sneak past large numbers of them as they discover the remnants of an old survivor camp in the dingy and grimy surroundings. Soon, however, Joel unwittingly triggers a jerry-rigged door, which separates their group of four into two groups of two, with exactly the wrong pairing. Joel and Sam stand on one side of the door, while Ellie and Henry stand on the other. Just as the two pairs start looking for a way to get the door open, a group of clickers gets attracted by the commotion. The two pairs are forced to go in different directions and fend for themselves, trusting that they'd be able to take care of themselves and each other. Joel and Sam together make their way past a number of infected, and eventually they're reunited with Ellie and Henry. In a final, tense face-off against an entire swarm of the infected bearing down on them, Ellie and Sam are able to find a way out of the sewers as Joel and Henry hold off the oncoming monsters. And while a well-earned moment of respite would have been very welcome for all four of them, that just isn't the world they live in. As Joel and the others make their way out of the sewers and continue their journey to the radio towers, they're ambushed once again by another group of the hunters. This time, though, they're boxed in, and the odds definitely don't look to be in their favor. The four of them are essentially pinned down, sticking behind cover at one end of the street, while a very well-placed sniper takes shots at them from a nest in a house at the other end. Once again, they're forced to think fast and act even faster. As Ellie, Henry, and Sam hunker down behind cover and distract the sniper, Joel moves in toward the nest from the flanks. Predictably enough, A number of other hunters lie in between them, and in a thrilling set-piece section, the game tasks the players with making their way to the sniper's nest. Eventually, after fighting or sneaking his way past the hunters he comes across, Joel manages to make it to the other end of the street, and after a brief scuffle, he makes quick work of the sniper. With the sniper rifle in hand, Joel proceeds to put all the hunters in the area in his crosshairs, and with deadly precision, he takes them all out as Ellie, Sam, and Henry move forward toward him on the street. The noise, however, alerts a group of infected in the area, and while Joel is busy taking out any hunters that he can spot, a group of runners attacks Ellie, Henry, and Sam. The incident catches Joel's attention, who takes out infected just in time. Or so they all think, because this single moment goes on to have massive repercussions for all four of them, especially for brothers Sam and Henry. That night, as Sam and Ellie fall asleep, Henry and Joel reminisce about the past, talking about nothing and everything, about riding bikes and the life they once took for granted. The two share some rare moments of peace and quiet. But peace, as we soon find out, never lasts in the world of The Last of Us. The next morning, as Henry asks Ellie to wake Sam up, the three of them are treated to a shocking revelation. When they were attacked by the runners at the sniper's nest, not all of them were able to escape unscathed. Unbeknownst to all three of them, Sam had a scratch on his leg and was infected. What's worse, he turned overnight, and as Ellie tries waking him up, an infected Sam attacks her. Joel pulls out his gun, takes aim, but he's stopped from pulling the trigger. A panic-stricken Harry pulls out his own gun and points it at Joel, warning him to stay away, even as Ellie struggles to keep Sam at bay. Henry, though, pulls the trigger. But instead of shooting Joel, he shoots Sam, distraught over the loss of his brother, the one person who mattered to him more than anyone else. The one person who'd kept him going in the world all this time. Henry takes aim at Joel again. Joel freezes, hands in the air, and tells Henry to calm down, telling him that what happened was no one's fault. Henry doesn't feel the same way. "It's your fault," he keeps repeating, though whether he's saying that at Joel or to himself, even he can't say for sure. And he turns the gun and shoots himself in the head.
Jackson County. Means we're close to Jackson City, right?
Should be more than a few miles.
You ready to see dear old brother?
I'm just ready to get there.
You nervous?
I don't know what I'm feeling.
After Joel and Ellie's run-in with the group of bandits known as the Hunters and the deaths of Henry and Sam, The Last of Us skips forward in time a little bit, moving from summer of the year 2033 into fall. Joel and Ellie's journey to Jackson County has progressed quite well in the time that has lapsed. In fact, when the story picks up again, they've almost arrived at their destination. As they make their way across a dam, we learn that Joel has, in a sense, all but forbidden Ellie from speaking about Henry and Sam, and it doesn't take a psychologist to see that this is just how Joel chooses to cope with his losses now. He doesn't want to speak about the two brothers. Back in Boston after Tessa's death, he'd very firmly told Ellie never to bring her up again. Hell, he doesn't even mention Sarah, his own daughter, anymore. Like everyone else who lives, Joel's losses keeps piling up, and he clearly sees no better way to deal with them. He hasn't lost everything, though, with his brother Tommy still alive. But while he is still alive, the two of them haven't seen each other in years, and Joel admits to Ellie that their relationship is more than just a little complicated. And it doesn't take very long to see just why that's the case either. Joel and Ellie soon come across a gated compound in the area around the dam, a hydroelectricity plant that has been walled off and is being manned by people armed with guns. As these guards sight the two wanderers moving in their direction, they point their weapons at them, telling them to turn around and leave. As it turns out, though, these people belong to Tommy, who's brought a group of his men from Jackson County to fix the hydroelectricity plant in order to provide electricity for his town. He tells the guards to stand down and brings Joel and Ellie inside. He introduces them to Maria, the woman who is essentially in charge of his group, and as it turns out, is also his wife. After these introductions, Maria takes Ellie with her to get some food, while Tommy gives Joel a tour of the plant. Eventually, as the tour comes to an end, the two estranged brothers find themselves alone, and they finally sit down for a much-needed and long overdue conversation. It is at this point that we learn exactly why Joel and Tommy's relationship has deteriorated as badly as it has. After the outbreak and the death of Sarah, Joel quickly learned that having a moral compass was a sure-shot way of getting yourself killed in this new and dangerous world he had found himself in. In the earlier years, when he and Tommy were still together, we learn in vague and nondescript terms that Joel did a lot of horrible stuff to keep the two of them alive, and that Tommy had been given no choice but to do the same. Eventually, he grew disillusioned by the brutal and violent ways of his brother, and it was this disillusionment that pushed him away from Joel and led him to join the Fireflies. Sure, eventually he did end up leaving the Fireflies too, but it had always been pretty clear that unlike his brother, Tommy was determined not to let the apocalypse turn him into an unrecognizable monster. But such things are par for the course in a world such as this one, and the two brothers don't waste much time going into detail about what happened. Joel gets to the point rather quickly. He tells Tommy about Ellie, that she is actually immune to the cordyceps infection, that her immunity could be the key to humanity's salvation, and that she needs to be delivered to the Firefly scientist for that purpose. He asks Tommy to take Ellie with her and deliver her to the Fireflies, telling him that he can collect the payment from Marlene once he does so. Tommy has no intentions of leaving, however. He tells Joel that he hasn't been with the Fireflies for a long time now, and that he has a life and a family that he can't just abandon at the drop of a hat. Things start heating up between the two brothers, but just as an argument is about to break out, they're cut short as a group of bandits falls upon the compound. Instinct kicks in for both of them, and deciding to save the argument for later, Joel and Tommy both grab their weapons and get to work. They make short work of the bandits, sweeping through the entire compound and, with the help of Tommy's own men, killing all of the attackers with precision and skill. After the attack, as they stand out in the yard measuring their losses, Tommy tells Joel and Maria that he's changed his mind and that he is indeed going to deliver Ellie to the Fireflies. Maria tries to talk him out of it, telling him that he can't just abandon all of the people who are counting on him, herself included, but Tommy refuses to budge. Maria's anger, however, turns out to be the least of their worries. It turns out that Ellie was listening in on their conversation, and when she hears that Joel is looking to leave her and hand her over to Tommy, she gets on a horse, and yes, Tommy's people have a few horses as well, and takes off into the woods outside. As soon as they realize that Ellie is gone, Joel and Tommy grab their own horses and go out looking for her. As they follow her tracks, they come across even more bandits in the woods. After several fights and encounters with the bandits, Joel and Tommy finally spot Ellie's horse hitched to a post of an abandoned house. The two of them go in, and once Joel finds Ellie in one of the rooms upstairs, she tells him why she left. She accuses Joel of wanting to get rid of her, saying that it was always his plan to dump her off on Tommy and then leave. Joel responds by saying that she would be much safer with Tommy, but at this point, it becomes pretty clear what he's really doing to both us, the players, and Ellie. She's taking none of his crap anymore. She tells Joel point blank that she is not Joel's daughter, implying that he doesn't have to be afraid of losing her the way that he lost Sarah. The mention of his long-dead daughter clearly doesn't sit well with Joel, though. He tells Ellie that she is indeed not his daughter, and that as such, she is not his responsibility. In no vague terms, Joel tells Ellie that this is happening, that she is going with Tommy, and that they're going their own separate ways. Their conversation is soon cut short, as a group of bandits invades the house that they're in, forcing them to deal with the situation at hand. Eventually, the three of them head back to the plant, but by the time they arrive, Joel's burst of anger has subsided, and he's had a change of heart. He and Ellie have faced much together in the few months that they've been in each other's company, and as much as they may want to deny it, there's no doubting that he's developed an attachment to the young girl. He tells Tommy that he's going to stay with Ellie and make sure that she gets to the Fireflies safe and sound. Tommy tells them that the Fireflies have a lab in the University of Eastern Colorado, at which point Joel and Ellie say their goodbyes, take one of Tommy's horses, and leave. They make it to the university in no time, but things aren't looking good. As Joel and Ellie start looking through the buildings on the campus, they come to the realization that the Fireflies aren't there anymore, and that what was once their lab has probably ended up abandoned for a long time. They start looking for clues as to where the Fireflies may have gone and eventually find a tape recording. It turns out that the remaining Fireflies have all fled to all the way over in Salt Lake City. So of course that is where Joel and Ellie are headed next, but things quickly take a dark turn before they can decide on their next course of action. As they're about to leave the university campus, they spot another group of survivors heading in their direction, and in The Last of Us, that is never a good thing. This is because, predictably enough, those survivors proceed to attack them. The next portion of the game tasks the players with finding their way out of the university grounds, employing either stealth or brute force, or both, to fight their way through the attackers. Up until this point, both Joel and Ellie have been very lucky in such situations, or in their encounters with the infected. Having narrowly escaped from several scenarios which ordinarily would have meant certain death, that luck, unfortunately enough, has to run out at some point, and that is exactly what happens. Joel gets taken by surprise as one of the attackers lunges at him from nowhere, and in the ensuing struggle, the two of them fall down from 2 stories up. The attacker dies, but Joel sustains serious damage. As he hits the ground, he is impaled through the stomach with a metal beam. Heavily injured and losing a lot of blood, Joel is on the verge of passing out, but somehow he manages to cling onto consciousness with Ellie's help. The two of them flee from the university grounds even as they're being pursued by their attackers, and at the end of a particularly intense sequence, they manage to make it back to where they had hitched their horse. Joel and Ellie ride away from the university, and a while later, Ellie declares that, at least for now, they seem to be safe. Joel, however, can no longer hold on. He passes out, unable to cope with his injury, leaving Ellie alone, helpless, and clueless. At this point, The Last of Us jumps forward in time once again, picking things up in the middle of winter. It is during this skipped period of time that Left Behind takes place, and while most of it revolves around Ellie scrambling to get a gravely injured Joel to safety, the bulk of the DLC portrays past events in Ellie's life, back in Boston before she met Joel and Tess. So before we continue recapping the story of The Last of Us, let's pause briefly and take a look at the flashbacks portrayed in Left Behind. Back in Boston, Ellie had a friend named Riley, a girl she shared a very special relationship with. 3 weeks before the events of The Last of Us, Riley and Ellie go through something monumentous and devastating. It starts as an innocent trip to an abandoned shopping mall, the place where the two of them first met. Riley, as it turns out, has her own reasons for bringing Ellie back here. She tells her that she's joined the Fireflies, and that she's been assigned to another group based in another city. She tells Ellie that she's soon about to leave, and that she wanted to spend one last great evening with her before that. Heartbreak follows, predictably enough. The two of them unwittingly attract the attention of a number of runners in the area, and though they manage to escape, they both get bitten, doomed to lose their minds to the infection. They decide that they're going to wait it out, that they're going to let the infection take them both over, being all poetic and lose their minds together, as Ellie puts it later in the game. Of course, we know how that turns out. The bite has no effect on Ellie whatsoever, thanks to her immunity, which, at that point, she was totally unaware of. Riley, however, has no such gift. The flashbacks in Left Behind DLC end at this heart-wrenching juncture. We pick up the main story once again, at a point where Joel and Ellie are more vulnerable than we have ever seen. With Joel's injury constantly getting worse, he is showing no signs of regaining consciousness, and Ellie is barely equipped to deal with the situation. When the game story picks up, the year has sped past fall and deep into the snowy white heart of winter.
You'll just startle it.
The snows have set in, and winter is well and truly underway by the time The Last of Us' story picks up again. And as it does something a little surprising. It puts players in the shoes of Ellie. After having spent so many hours playing as Joel, we find Ellie alone in the snow-covered woods, armed with a bow and arrow and hunting for meat when she comes across a buck in the distance. She manages to shoot it with a couple of arrows, and once she finds the trail of blood from its wounds, she manages to track it to an abandoned shack, where the buck has succumbed to its injuries and died by the time Ellie makes it there. That's not all she finds, however. As she stands over the dead buck by the shack, she notices 2 people approaching. With every reason to be cautious, she draws her bow and puts them in her sights, demanding to know what they want. They tell her they're David and James, a part of a larger group, and they offer to trade for her buck. Ellie is hesitant, understandably enough, but when David tells her that he'd be willing to trade anything for the buck, she asks him if he has any antibiotics, obviously needing them for the still injured Joel. David tells Ellie that he does indeed have antibiotics and tells James to go back to their camp to retrieve them, accepting to stay behind with Ellie and wait for him to come back. Ellie also asks David to give up his rifle, to which he agrees quite easily. He proceeds to ask her name, but despite his seemingly good nature, Ellie is still unwilling to trust him, and she refuses to divulge any real information about herself. As they wait for David's companion to return, however, they hear the infected in the distance, and they both realize that they're headed in their direction in quite large numbers. David pulls out his pistol, and together he and Ellie are able to hold the infected at bay and ultimately fight them off. Following that, they continue their wait for James, but while they do, Ellie makes a startling discovery. David reveals to her that the people that had attacked her and Joel at the University of Eastern Colorado had been his own men, and they'd been part of the same group of survivors. And David, it seems, is clearly not happy about how many of his people Joel and Ellie managed to kill in that attack. Realizing that she may be in more trouble than she can handle right now, Ellie jumps to her feet with her rifle pointed at David. But right at that moment, James returns with his own weapon pointed at Ellie. David, on the other hand, continues to sit calmly by the fire and tells his man to lower his weapon. James is reluctant to do that, but he does so upon David's orders, who then goes on to order him to give Ellie the antibiotics he brought as well. With the medicine in hand, Ellie leaves the shack and runs. Before long, she manages to find where she had hitched her horse and rides away. Soon, she arrives at an abandoned house, and when she goes in, it's revealed that Joel is inside. He's resting on the ground, still looking extremely ill and very weak. Ellie injects the medicine into Joel, covers him with a blanket, and goes to sleep on the floor by his side. When she wakes up, though, she realizes that things have once again taken a turn for the worse. She discovers that David and his group have managed to track her down, and seeing as Joel is barely conscious and in no condition to fight, she realizes that she has only one option. She leaves the house, hoping to distract David's group and then circle back for Joel once she's managed to shake them. She quickly gets on her horse and rides away, successfully getting the attention of the attackers and managing to draw them to her. Her horse gets shot down rather quickly, however, forcing her to continue forward on foot. As she makes her way past David's men, at a certain point it starts looking like she may just be able to escape. Unfortunately enough, however, the heroes of this world just don't have that kind of luck. David manages to catch up to Ellie, and he knocks her unconscious. When Ellie wakes up, she's locked in a cell, and right outside her cell she sees James, David's companion from earlier, butchering what looks like a human body on a table. Yes, you guessed it right. David's group is the post-apocalyptic group of cannibals that we just knew had to be included in this kind of story. Ellie is understandably fazed as she sees the sight. David, who is also there, tells Ellie that he doesn't intend to kill her. He tries getting on her good side, telling her that she just might have a place in his group if she's willing to join. And as you may have guessed, Ellie has no intention of doing that. Being the feisty personality that she is, she makes an attempt to grab the keys off David, breaking one of his fingers in the process. Having lost his patience by this point, David makes it quite clear to Ellie that she's just signed her own death warrant. He leaves the room, telling her that he's gonna cut her up to little pieces. Back at the abandoned house, Joel finally wakes up, probably thanks to the medicine Ellie gave him earlier. He notices Ellie's missing and goes outside, only to see that there are other people in the area as well, and all of them armed. As you've put together, these people are from David's group as well. Joel kills all the people in the area, save for two, and these two he captures. In an intense sequence that follows, Joel tortures and questions both of them until they give up the location of the resort where David's group is keeping Ellie. Having been told what he wanted to know, Joel promptly kills both his captives. The focus jumps back to Ellie again as she's roughly woken up by James. He drags her to the butcher's table where both he and David try to hold her down. Ellie tries to struggle, biting David in the process, but to no effect. Just as David is about to bring down the cleaver on her though, she bursts out that she's infected, proceeding to show them the wound on her arm. The two men stand shocked, and Ellie sees her opportunity and takes it. She grabs the butcher knife and buries it in James's neck. Even as David shoots at her, she manages to make a narrow escape. She runs for it, looking for a way out of the resort, and eventually finds herself in an old restaurant. David gives chase and quickly manages to track her down, trapping her inside the restaurant. The building catches fire in their ensuing struggle, and with the two of them still inside, Ellie tries to get in close and stab him with her switchblade and manages to get a few hits in successfully. However, soon, the two get into a struggle which results in both of them being knocked unconscious, trapped in the middle of a raging fire. Meanwhile, Joel has managed to find his way to the resort by now. The next portion of the game sees players playing as Joel and fighting or sneaking past David's men. Finally, he finds what he's looking for. He spots a building drowning in flames a short distance away. Inside the building, Ellie comes to. She spots David's machete lying under a table, and injured and dizzy as she is, she starts crawling toward it. David, however, wakes up as well and stops her. He kicks her a few times and then pins her down. Ellie tries struggling, and soon she manages to grab hold of the machete. She violently hacks away at David, slashing him with her weapon again and again, even past the point of killing him. Joel enters the building at this point and runs to Ellie. He pulls her away, but Ellie, who is understandably traumatized, pushes him away, thinking he's another one of David's men. Joel manages to soothe her, holding her in his arms, and the two soon leave. The Last of Us' story skips forward one more time at this juncture, moving past winter and into spring. Joel and Ellie's trek to Salt Lake City has gone rather well. In fact, when we rejoin them, the Fireflies' home base is clearly visible in the distance. They make their way through the overgrown, abandoned city in the direction of the hospital, and as they do, they find something beautiful and unexpected. As they leave to continue making their way toward the hospital, however, Joel stops Ellie. He tells her that they don't have to go to the Fireflies, that if they want, they can just go back to Tommy's in Jackson County and try to live out a peaceful life. But Ellie won't have it. The two of them have come too far, done too much, and been through even more to give up now. She tells him that if they just turn back now, it'll all have been for nothing. As they continue onward, Ellie brings up Sarah once again, and surprisingly this time Joel reacts rather differently. Ellie hands him a photograph of his daughter, telling him she grabbed it when they were at Tommy's all those months ago. Joel accepts the photo and thanks her for it, accepting that in spite of all his efforts, he's not going to escape his past, and maybe it's for the best if he just stops trying. They eventually make it to an underground tunnel, but they realize making it through would be easier said than done. For starters, the tunnel is completely flooded, and as we've learned by this point, Ellie doesn't know how to swim. As if that weren't enough, a few areas inside that aren't completely submerged are teeming with the infected. The next portion of the game sees Joel and Ellie tiptoe their way around a dangerously high number of runners and clickers. The two of them eventually get to a rickety platform that looks like a way out of the tunnel, with some overturned buses acting like a sort of bridge toward the platform. As they get on top of the buses, they find out that the water on the other side is much more dangerous and ferocious, and predictably enough, things start to go wrong. Joel falls off, and the two of them soon find themselves inside the bus, trapped in the middle of rushing water. Joel grabs hold of Ellie, who, thanks to her inability to swim in the rushing water, has lost consciousness. He drags her out of the water, somehow making it to the tunnel's exit. He frantically tries to resuscitate her, and in his panic, he doesn't even notice as a patrol of armed and armored Fireflies approach them. With their weapons aimed at Joel and the unconscious Ellie, they tell him to put his hands in the air, and when the panic-stricken Joel ignores them, one of the Fireflies hits him in the head with his rifle and knocks him out. When Joel wakes up, he finds that he's lying in a hospital bed with Marlene sitting by his side. She tells him that it was her men who rescued him and Ellie. Joel is visibly relieved, but this relief doesn't last very long. He and Ellie may have been constantly putting their lives at risk for the better part of the last year just so they can get to the Fireflies. But things in the world of The Last of Us don't always turn out the way one might expect them to. Joel asks Marlene to take him to see Ellie, but she tells him that that's not possible. Ellie, you see, is already being prepped for surgery by the Fireflies' doctors. She is to undergo a procedure that'll remove the mutated infection inside of her head, which would then be used by the scientists to reverse engineer a vaccine. And while this may sound like excellent news to possibly every person left on the planet, Joel knows what that means. He points out that the fungal virus grows over the host's entire brain, which means that if this procedure is conducted, Ellie will die. And Joel can't have that. Things between him and Marlene start to get tense. He tells her that if doing this operation means Ellie loses her life, then she needs to find someone else. But, of course, there is no one else. And that's why Ellie's immunity is as special as it is. Marlene tells Joel that she doesn't like what's about to happen either, and she's known Ellie for a long time, and her death will be hard on her as well. But if her death is the price that has to be paid to save the entire human race, then that's just what has to happen. Marlene quickly realizes that the idea of the procedure isn't sitting well with Joel, and that in all likely scenarios, he's probably going to try to stop it. She orders one of the Firefly soldiers to escort Joel out of the building, and if he tries anything, to shoot him and kill him. But Joel, as we have learned, can be an untamed beast when he needs to be, and protecting Ellie is the one thing that now drives him more than anything else. As he is being escorted outside, Joel attacks the Firefly soldier and kills him. He recovers his weapon and his belongings and makes for the operating room. Scores of Fireflies swarm in, attracted by the gunshots, and a good chunk of the game that follows tasks the players with fighting their way through them. Eventually, Joel makes it to the operating room, where the surgeons are standing over an unconscious Ellie. Joel kills the doctors, grabs Ellie, and runs through the hospital as he tries to find a way out. After narrowly escaping more incoming fireflies, he finds an elevator and takes it all the way down to the basement. When he gets there, though, he sees Marlene is standing in front of him with her gun pointed right at him. She makes one final attempt to change his mind. Marlene tells Joel that performing this surgery on Ellie is the only way to fight back against the cordyceps infection, and that if Ellie knew the price that had to be paid for it, she would do so willingly. She tells him that even if she were alive, this world was not worth living in. Sooner or later, she would get torn to pieces by one of the infected, and if she weren't, she'd probably get murdered by outlaws and bandits. Marlene lowers her weapon, telling Joel that he can still do the right thing here. The concepts of right and wrong, however, have become extremely misty in Joel's mind over the last 20 years. He shoots Marlene in the stomach and puts Ellie in the car, and then turns back around to kill the leader of the Fireflies. Marlene, lying injured on the ground, begs him to let her live, to leave and never return. But Joel is not the kind of person who likes leaving loose ends, and that's just what he tells Marlene. He tells her that if he let her live, she'd just come after Ellie, and he shoots her in the head. As they're driving away from the hospital, Ellie regains consciousness. When she asks Joel what's going on, he lies to her, hiding the truth about everything that happened. He tells her that she's just one of the many people who are immune to the infection, and that their attempts to find a cure for the virus have all been for nothing. He tells her that the Fireflies have actually stopped looking for a cure. The Last of Us skips ahead in time one final time. Joel and Ellie have made it back to Jackson County and are just a short distance away from Tommy's town when their car stops working. As the two of them walk through the woods to the place they plan to call home, Ellie stops Joel. She tells him about Riley, her friend who died in Boston when the two of them were bitten, and then mentions all the other people that died to help Ellie get to the Fireflies. Understandably enough, she's experiencing a little bit of survivor's guilt, and she's wondering if with her immunity there was something more she could have done to help end the pandemic. It's then that she asks Joel, point blank, about the truth of what happened in the hospital. She asks him if everything he told her was true, everything about the Fireflies and the cure. Joel pauses, looks at her, and he tells her that it was. Ellie looks back at him, uncertain, and as the player starts wondering if she believes him, she says, "Okay." And the screen cuts to black. And there it is. That's how The Last of Us finishes, with one of the most unusual and powerful endings you'll ever see in a video game. One that perfectly encapsulates the understated genius of the entire game as a whole. And that brings an end to this series as well. If there's anything that you feel we may have missed, or if you have suggestions about which series or game we should look at next in our Story So Far series, sound off in the comments section below. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily. Also, don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon, that way you don't miss out on any of our videos.